welcome to episode 187 of the Craft House Magic podcast. My name's Ellie and I'm coming to you from Norwich in Norfolk in the UK, and today is the 20th of October, so welcome everybody. I hope you all had a lovely crafty week since the last time I've spoken to you, and I'm here to share all the things that I've been making in the last 7 days. So today I have some knitting, some sewing, some cross stitch, a gadget, a blast from the past. Basically my blast from the past is looking at all the other Stephen West mystery knit-alongs that I've knitted over the years. I have a couple of questions from the Ask Me Anything thread and some information on my shop at the end of the podcast. You can skip along to any of those sections using the progress bar just below the video. So we have a make-along going on in the Ravelry group and Instagram, and you can find details to that in the description bar down below. I think we should get on with the knitting. So first of all, I've only been knitting on one project this week. I've been basically doing clue 2 of the mystery knit along that Stephen West has released, and this is called the Shawlography. So if you don't want to see how this has turned out, if you skip along to the sewing section, then you won't get any spoilers. So I'm going to show it to you now. So this is how I've got on with my Shawlography. So the first clue 1, was up to these little wibbly bits here. So we had this squishy section I showed you last week, these sort of slip stitches, and then these little wiggly bits. And since then I've done this sort of, I think it looks like a spider web section with alternating colours and doing some slip stitches, and then these welts which were quite cool to do, really interesting. These triangle sections, and then a whole row of bobbles all the way around, and then these side bits. It's really lovely and squishy there. So it's a mixture of the grey and one of the light blues. I was a bit worried that it does look a little bit busy, this shawl, but I think because there's a nice even balance of this yellow here, here and here, I think it sort of blends nicely. It does remind me of a sort of colourwork pattern, but I am loving it so far. I haven't quite got to the end of the clue 2. There's basically this section is supposed to be on both sides, so I haven't got round to doing that yet. But you get the idea, you get the gist of what it's going to look like. And I've got clue 3 coming out on Friday, so I've got this evening and tomorrow morning to catch up to see if I can finish that side bit, because I really like being ready to start the next section as soon as the clue comes out, because it is very exciting. So for this shawl I'm using some MCN yarn, and it's my own hand dyed, and it's basically 5 of the colours in my Fade to Grey mini set. I do have some mini sets in the shop, including some of the Fade to Grey, but I'm not dying to order at the moment in terms of yarn, but there are some colourways that are just ready to ship that are on the website, including all gadgets and things. So that is my clue 2 for the Shawlography, and we're going to skip straight into sewing now, because that is all the knitting that I've been doing this week. It's quite hard to keep up with the clues, I think, if you just sort of knit in the evenings. So my sewing is some mattress covers, I'm afraid, so they're not very exciting, but I just wanted to tell you sort of how much fabric etc they used. So these are the mattress covers that I'm making for the Moses basket for my new baby, and it's basically just a pillowcase opening at the back, and I did make one to go on the mattress previously, but I thought, well, if I have a couple of spares they can be chucked in the wash and I don't have to worry about not having enough. Somebody did put in the comments though that it is a really good idea you can use pillowcases as well, so I will keep that in mind if 3 isn't enough, but I just thought because I've got the fabric I'd make up a couple more. So I've made a white one and a very pale blue one. I don't suppose you can tell that it's pale blue on the photo, but I've made those 2 as well as sort of spares, just because I've got the fabric ready. And if you want a little bit more detail of how I sort of made the pattern up, I did talk about this about 3 episodes ago. I will link to the correct episode in the show notes in the description bar, but I will briefly go through it. So what I did is I drew round the mattress, and then I added 1.5 centimetres seam allowance down the outside. I folded it on the centre point so that that was halfway, and then I added 2 inches for an overlap. So for each mattress cover I cut 2 of these and 1 of the large version, and then I just hemmed the 2 smaller ones by pressing it 1/4 of an inch and then a second 1/4 of an inch and top stitching it shut, sandwiching those 3 pieces together and just stitching around the outside and giving it an overlock so that it doesn't fray. But I did go into it in more detail in one of the previous episodes. But I did work out how much fabric that I needed to make one of the mattress covers. So I needed 65 centimetres of fabric to make one, with a little bit of sort of left over. I did have a 1 metre piece of fabric that was 112 centimetres wide, and I got 2 out of a metre. If you're careful at placing where your pieces are. So hopefully that makes sense. So if you are making a mattress cover, it'll be nice and easy for you to work out how much fabric you'll need. So that is my sewing for this week. Very brief, but this weekend I'm really excited to get going on my Lola coat, which I mentioned, I think it was last week. I'm going to need a hand with Adam to cut out the pieces because it's getting harder for me to sort of bend over, or normally I'd put the fabric on the floor and then be cutting out big pieces if it's like a coat or a dress or something. I can't really do it on the table because my table's area is quite small, so I'm gonna have to get Adam to help me, I think. Seems as I'm so pregnant at the moment. So hopefully next week I'll get that finished and I'll give you a twirl. You can see how big my bump is as well. Hopefully get that done. So next I'm going to talk about my cross stitch. So last week I showed you that I'd got out a kit out of my stash, and this is what the photograph looks like on the kit, and it's a school sampler. I think that's what it's called, little school sampler, and it's from the Cross Stitch Guild. So I'll leave a link to their website in the description bar down below. But I did notice actually they'd got kits available for this still in the shop, so if you do want one I'll leave a link to it in the description bar down below. So in these kits all the threads come together, and they're actually already on cards with the numbers on them, which is very handy. And then on the other side it says Cross Stitch Guild, so there's the full set of threads that I need with all the numbers written on them so that it's ready to stitch, which is brilliant. You don't have to sort out the thread, which is good. And there are lots of detailed instructions about how to do the cross stitch. If you're a beginner with cross stitch, there's lots of explanations on a few sheets that tell you how to do the cross stitch. But I did notice that I obviously can't show you the chart because it's a paid for pattern, but they've put the instructions for the actual cross stitch, and then they've written on top of that chart the back stitch and all the other different stitches that they've recommended on top of that. So it is quite a busy chart, and it isn't in colour, so it's sometimes difficult to differentiate the back stitching on there, I think. But the actual chart itself in terms of the cross stitches, it seems quite easy to follow. So we shall see how I get on when I get to the back stitches. So this is how I've got on so far. I've done the little schoolhouse. Let's see if I can get the picture on the same screen so you can see. I'm stitching on the schoolhouse at the moment. I've got some details to put in there as well, but it's only a small piece, so hopefully it shouldn't take me too long. I think I was being a bit over optimistic last week when I said that I'd probably get to finish it in a couple of weeks. But it has gone relatively quickly. I started this at the weekend, and the more you get into things I tend to think that you go a bit faster with them because you sort of get into it and know what you're doing. So maybe a few weeks, maybe before the baby's born. We shall see. So I am using a needle minder from Chapelview Crafts, and I'll leave a link to her website in the description bar down below. She makes some lovely little magnetic needle holders, which is brilliant. I'll leave links to the frame and the needle minder and the kit in the description bar down below, and also I've got a floor standing clip frame to hold this in, so I will leave a link to the one I have in the description bar down below as well. So every time I do show a cross stitch I'll try and leave a links to all the things that I use, including my magnifying glasses that I like to use because my eyesight isn't brilliant. So this is supposed to be a 28 count casual linen that's included, and it feels a lovely linen to use. I think I'm really starting to get used to working on linen now. I think when I first started on the linen it was sort of difficult because you've got to count 2 squares, and I was a bit worried about getting confused, but actually it's not that hard at all, and this is a beautiful linen to work with. So there we go, that is my cross stitch for this week, and then I'm going to move on to my gadget section. So this week I'm going to talk about seam rippers. So I did have a seam ripper with my sewing machine, which is a very small seam ripper, which is really good. It's fine, it's nice and sharp, it's just not very big to grasp onto, and I find ones with a larger handle are better to use. So I have 2 seam rippers that I really love in my stash. I have the Clover seam ripper, which I've now just started stocking in my shop, and that's got a lovely sharp point and a really light, quite nice grippy handle on it. And then this is a very similar one as well. This one is from Seamfix, and this one's got a lid, but to be honest I don't really use the lid very much because I tend to use them in my craft room, and I just leave them in the little tray ready to use rather than having the lid on. But this one's quite good because it's got a little rubber end, and you can use that to take the threads away, but I must say I haven't really used that feature on it very much, so I definitely recommend these 2 for a seam ripper if you're looking to buy a new one. I will leave a link to both of these in the description bar down below. This one I have in my shop. I will find a source where you can get this one as well. So that's my gadget for this week, and I'm going to talk about my blast from the past. Actually there's several of these because I do like a Stephen West knit along. So Stephen has been doing mystery knit alongs for about 13 years, I think that's what he'd said on his Instagram account. I've only been doing them for a few years, I suppose, but I thought I'd show you the ones that I've completed. So if I go back to the oldest version, I have one of the Doodlers, which was back in 2016. So this is the Doodler shawl, and I absolutely love the style of this one. It was made with some Life in the Long Grass yarn that I picked up from the Knitting and Stitching show, I think, and it was from Michelle from the Loveliest Yarn Company. I remember purchasing it, and I was so pleased to put the colours together in this shawl, and I really love the way the colours work together. I will leave a link to my Ravelry page if you want to know what the colourways were, but again I did buy these quite a few years ago, so I don't know if you'll be able to get hold of them again. But the Doodler, I found, well, I am quite a tight knitter, but it's not an amazingly large shawl. It's got a really gorgeous chunky cable across the top, but it's not a mega big shawl, and you'd need to wear it using a shawl pin really, so I like to have a shawl pin like that so you can see all the wiggly bits. Really pretty, these wiggly bits, and of course edged with I-cord. So that's the 2016 one. I must admit though, I did knit this after the MKAL because I didn't realise that they were mystery knit alongs at the time. But the first one I properly joined in was the Building Blocks shawl, which was this one. And I have never actually blocked this. But I've worn it loads. I think I love the colours, and actually these colours are a little bit similar to the latest one that I've been doing. This is the Building Blocks shawl, and I did actually, this was my first time doing brioche, and it was in this section here, which isn't the easiest time to start brioche because there was lots of increases and decreases along that section, but I did enjoy it and I really got into that, and it has got quite a wingspan on this. But I love it because it's lovely and cosy and squishy around the neck. And the yarn that I used for this one was some Hedgerow yarns, and I picked this up quite a few years ago again, so I don't know whether you'd be able to get hold of those colourways, but I think I did make a note of them on my Ravelry page, and again I'll leave a link to that in the description bar down below. So that was from 2017. and I did actually miss one out. There was a Marled Magic shawl in 2018, and for some reason I just didn't realise there was a mystery knit along going on, and I missed it. How terrible. So I did miss that one. But it's basically marling colours together using 2 strands of different coloured yarns to get a different effect with the colours. I may go back to it one day, I don't know. There's always a Stephen West that I want to cast on. 2019 was the Starflake, and this was a really lovely shape. So it looks like a star in the middle, and I used some of my own hand dyed for this one. So this one was Nobody Does It Better, which is the corally colour, and then Ordinary World, which is a blue grey. And I love this one, especially because it goes around your shoulders really well because of the shape. And there is a blanket version of this shawl, but it really lays on your shoulders really well and stays there because it is there's a sort of wedge shape open for your neck to go in, rather than it being like a half circle or whatever. So I do like that. This has got a bit of brioche in as well, but I'd got into it by then, so it was okay. But I do love this pattern, and I'm very tempted to knit the blanket version. It's basically the star in a complete circle, so there's another wedge here. But some people did lots of different colours, which looks really nice too. I think this was 2 skeins of each of the 2 colours for that one. So that was 2019, and then I think this is one of my favourites of all of Stephen West's. It's the Slipstravaganza, and this one was last year's mystery knit along, and I absolutely love this. I like the honeycomb section. There's like a little sort of dotty section here, and this last 2 sections here with the grey partitions in the middle of the diamonds and the zigzags at the bottom. I absolutely love those. So for this particular shawl, I picked out a couple of skeins of MCN yarn out of my stash. I can't quite remember what the yarns were. I know that the greeny colour was a I Love Daryl from Lolo Did It, and then I had this gorgeous purpley colour which I thought went really well with it. Again, I'm not sure what it was, but I will leave a link to my Ravelry page so you can see what the yarns and the colourways were. But for the grey, I actually dyed up some of my own yarn on MCN on the Living on a Prayer colourway, which is just like a tonal grey colour to bring it all together. And I absolutely love this one. This one I wear probably the most out of all my shawls, I think. It's lovely and big and squishy. And I just was so surprised how much I love these big holes in the middle. It just gives it such a beautiful look. Really, really love this one. So I definitely love all of my Stephen West shawls that I've knitted. So I am pleased that I had a go at the mystery knit alongs. It challenges you as well and gets you to do things perhaps that you wouldn't have tried before. So that is my blast from the past for this week. So the next section is the Ask Me Anything section. So you can either pop a question on the Ravelry group or drop me a message on crafthousemagik@gmail.com, and I'll try and answer your question on the podcast. So the first question is from Becky, and she asked me to explain about alternating skeins. So she had several sort of mini questions within that. Do you alternate skeins for all hand-dyed yarn or just a specific type? How do you actually do it? Do you alternate 100 gram skeins or split each skein into 50 grams? And when you're coming to the end of the skein, do you need to change to a new one? And could you potentially have 4 on the go at the same time? I'm going to go to sort of very basic alternating skeins because there are many ways of doing it. But generally, if I've only got 100 grams and I'm knitting a smaller project in hand-dyed yarn, I wouldn't bother alternating the skein, to be honest. You may get some variations in the colour, but I just don't think it's worth bothering with if you've just got one skein. You'd want to alternate skeins when you're knitting a garment, and with any hand-dyed yarns, I'd advise people to alternate skeins when you're knitting a garment. So what I tend to do is probably slightly cheaty. If I'm knitting a jumper, for instance, and the yoke is quite a complicated sort of lace pattern or something, I will just knit that bit in one skein, because alternating skeins in lace or anything that's quite complicated gets confusing. So I would knit that in one skein. But as soon as I'd sort of got to the point where I was just knitting in the round for the body, I would alternate skeins then. So I would use 200-gram skeins, and I would do 2 rows in one, 2 rows in another, and I would literally start right at the beginning of the round, knit 2 rows with one, and then switch at the beginning of the round to knit 2 rows with another. Now there are techniques called helical knitting and other techniques like that, but I'm just talking about basic alternating skeins. You just need to be careful that you don't pull too tight at that beginning of a round where your yarn is going over 2 rows. There's a bit on the back. Don't pull it too tight or too loose. You want to have that sort of Goldilocks area so that it doesn't show on the outside of the garment. Quite often I'll make sure that this seam is down the side of the body so that you can't see it if it does show up a little bit on the outside. So going back to Becky's questions, I would do it with all hand dyed for garments when you're using 2 or more skeins. I hopefully explained how to do it. So 2 rows of one, 2 rows of another. That's very basic alternating skeins so that you get quite an even variation of colour. If you've got quite different skeins that are from different dye lots, for instance, you might get a sort of striping effect. So it depends what you want. So if you've got, say, 4 skeins and 2 light and 2 dark, I'd try and integrate them. So using one of the darks and one of the light sets, so that your knitting is as even as possible. But it all depends on how you prefer to do it. I think there's no sort of exact right way. You've just got to sort of play it by ear and see what works for you and whether you're happy with the result, really. I wouldn't say you needed to split them into 50-gram balls unless, say, you've got 2 skeins left and you're knitting sleeves at the same time, and one skein is slightly darker than the other. Perhaps you'd want to split it so that you're sort of doing them at the same time, where you're sort of alternating them so that you've got dark light on one side and the same on the other so that they match. That's the only way I'd probably split them, but as a general rule I wouldn't bother splitting them into 50 grams. I have knitted a shawl actually where I had 2 skeins and it was just a plain colour, and it was like a wrap shawl, and I did actually alternate the 2 skeins in the middle, so if there was any difference it would sort of fade from one colour to the other. So if there is much difference between the 2, it's blended so it looks like you've done it on purpose. That's what I always say. So it's always playing it by ear, trying out what you like, and if you really don't like the effect you can just try and alternate skeins in a different way. So the next question is from Sanita, and she was asking, do I recommend a good lint bobble or pill shaver suitable for garments, including knitted garments as well? I would say that I would recommend the Gleaner. I should have got it out of the packet before I started the podcast. And this is what it looks like. You have one side where it's got this sort of lint shaver. This basically catches all the little bobbles and you can get them off your garment, and I've actually used this with not only knitted garments but also I've got some cushion covers in the lounge that sometimes pill, so there's several different adapter things on this. One is for finer fabrics, so this one here works better on finer fabrics, and then this is better for sort of larger lint balls. So I use those and they're interchangeable. And then it's got another pad on the other side, which if you do it in this direction it will grab the little bits of lint, so it's a great way of collecting it as well. So I have used this quite a lot and I would recommend this, and this is called a Gleaner. I will try and pop a link in the description bar to it down below. I have purchased an electronic bobble remover which is battery powered, but I won't say I'll recommend it because Adam had to fix it before I could get it to work properly, so I would not recommend it because it wasn't built very well. But it works okay. But I think that this sort of manual one is the, you know, it's your best value for money, and it will keep working, which is good. And that's called the Gleaner. I'll leave a link to it in the description bar down below, and I do use it on t-shirts and things that have pilled quite a bit, and it's quite good that there's lint removers, for one for finer and one for slightly sort of bobblier, thicker fabric. So there we go, hope that helps, Anita. So last of all, I've got my information on my shop. Now this Friday I will have finally an update on my sharp and steel needles. I've been waiting for the warehouse to restock in a lot of these for quite some time. So it's basically most of the sharp and steel tips and needles. I think it was the main things that were missing before with the flyer needles in the 2.5mm in steel and sharp, and I've got a load of those coming in, so that's good. And also the sort of 100cm fixed cables and 80cm fixed cables in the 2.5cm as well, so those will be restocked tomorrow. The bamboo needles are still in quite short supply, I think, because of the harvest, the harvest of the bamboo not being brilliant the last year or so. But it's good that the sharp and the steel needles have come back in. So I just wanted to reiterate as well that my shop still has knitting needles, knitting accessories, sewing, other crafting accessories, fabrics, bag making supplies, knitting and sewing patterns, as well as some yarns. So I've taken down a lot of the yarns that I was dying to order, but I have quite a few mini sets that are ready to ship, and I also do all the bases that I normally do in undyed yarn that are all ready to go. So anything that I don't have to sort of make is going to be in the shop all over my pregnancy, and all the handmade items will be back in January after I've had a little bit of time with the baby. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I shall see you in the next episode. Bye!